All right. So welcome back to Sober Yoga Girl. I am super excited for this episode to have Kayla Lyons as a guest. And Kayla is the founder of 1,000 Hours Dry. And this past week, I did a pop-up yoga class with 1,000 Hours Dry on Instagram, which is super cool. And Kayla is also a mental health activist in the United States, in California. So hi, Kayla.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Just ending the week here, so.
Yeah. Oh, I guess ending the weekend for us, we're starting because, as you know, Middle East Sunday.
Yes.
So tell me a bit about yourself, kind of your background, your story, who you are, and where you're from.
For sure. So I'm living here in sunny Southern California. I was actually born here in Palm Springs, but I really grew up kind of everywhere. My dad worked for the State Department, so we were moving probably every 2 to 3 years. So I actually grew up overseas most of my life, and then I came back to the States for high school and university. Pretty standard if you're a State Department brat. I had a really cool upbringing. Nothing, I feel like I like to set the tone with this because I think when you are not someone who has substance abuse issues, you automatically assume somebody who has had issues like, oh, they must have had a really traumatizing upbringing, or their parents must have been alcoholics. They must have grown up in, some sort of bad environment. And truthfully, that was really not my story. I had both very loving parents. I got to do a lot of things. And let's say like I went on a safari in Africa, and I got to do all these things before I was even in high school. So I had a very privileged and very cultured upbringing. But for me, I think the caveat being that I had a lot of instability. And for me, it was really not being able to attach to people because I knew, okay, well, in a year or two from now, I'm probably never going to see them again, because it's not like you're moving from state to state or from city to city, you're moving to the other side of the world. And so I learned to really not attach to people. And my parents got divorced when I was probably 8. And my mom also remarried somebody who was in the State Department. So then I was kind of living everywhere again, but then my dad was on one side of the world when I was on the other. And so I really just learned not to get attached to people, that people come and go. And by the time I moved back to the States, I really didn't have an identity, I would say. And so it happened really fast for me. I started drinking at 15, kind of around that age that people start experimenting with alcohol. And for me, it didn't evolve. Like I hit the ground running already. Like there was no good point. There was no like, oh, it was normal and then it got bad. Like for me, it was bad from the beginning. And I mean, by the time I graduated high school at 17, I already had 3 underage alcohol citations, which are like, a drunk in public, but for an underage student. So that kind of sets the tone of where I was already starting in my alcohol journey. But when I look back, I'm 28 now. I've done a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of, work on myself. And I think really for me, what happened was having a lot of anxiety, having a little bit of PTSD from some emotional trauma early on, and never really dealing with that. And growing up in a home where there was a lot of love, but not a lot of emotional intelligence. So rather than being told it's okay to talk about your feelings, it's okay to, speak and be vocal, it was very much not that way. Growing up in a military home, you're told kind of keeping those feelings to yourself. Being over emotional is a sign of weakness. And you really don't want to show the outside world that there's anything wrong. So it was a lot about perception and a lot about making everything look good, but how you're feeling internally doesn't really matter. And so I think by the time I got old enough to learn how to cope, of course, rather than a healthy coping mechanism, I chose to drink because that is what was familiar to me rather than, let's say, overeating or other types of addictions that people choose. Yeah.
Yeah. I love how you describe that. I've never heard it described that way, as like a home with a lot of love, but not a lot of emotional intelligence. And I think a lot of listeners can probably relate to that. Like, it's not that a home necessarily lacked love. It's that you're not almost taught how to like express and manage and cope with your feelings.
Totally. And I think for anybody listening that's a millennial and older, I had behavioral issues from the get-go. I was having massive tantrums. I had night terrors. I had a lot of signs. And later on, to get into depth, there was some trauma there for me. There was some sexual trauma. Nothing, I don't want to downgrade it, but, nothing crazy. But in the 90s, when your parents take their child to, their pediatrician, and they say, oh, my kid's having issues, it was not really the norm to be like, okay, let's go see a child psychologist, let's go see therapists. It's really, oh, it's a phase, they'll grow out of it. I had weird phobias. I was afraid of socks. Then I was afraid of carpet. Like, they just said, oh, like, she's just going through a phase. And then I had all these phases, I was mean, I was biting kids, like all these things that now, as an adult and as somebody who is studying psychology, I can look back on and be like, okay, these are clear signs of like distress. And for me, it turns out I now have diagnosed OCD, but I was just dealing with a lot internally and not having a professional telling me, okay, this is how we deal with it, getting me into some sort of occupational therapy at a young age. I dealt with it through tantrums. I dealt with it through throwing things and being basically a brat. But once again, we're talking about the 90s, where it was really still super stigmatized, mental health and toxic masculinity and all those things. And so I think young people listening are very lucky that they're starting to grow up in an environment where, talking about your feelings, being open about your mental health and your, what you're going through is okay and it's normalized. Whereas I think people our age can kind of relate more to, we weren't there yet. We might get that. We have that now as adults, but so much of, who we are as a person is shaped when we're in that phase between, like 1 and 10 years old. And so, it doesn't take, like, I think people have this idea that it takes like all this serious, crazy trauma, in order for a person to turn to substances, but it really doesn't. Like, we all have what they're called our ACEs, or these scenarios or environment situations that happen that build up, that make us at higher risk to use substances or just have an addiction in general. And for me, it was kind of combination, right? Like unstable family environment, divorce, already dealing with mental health issues, but having no, like at the time, untreated, and then finally getting old enough. And I think of it this way. I had a very good friend of mine who, same age, a lot of the same issues, but she ended up having an eating disorder. And for her, she went that route, it seems, because she grew up in a home where food was very restricted. It was super important for her mom to have everything be healthy. It was super important for them to, look a certain way. And so that was the hyper focus. And so when she needed to choose basically a vice, the controlled eating was hers. And for me, food was not so much an issue in my household as alcohol was available. There were no heavy drugs or anything like that, but that was what was available to me at the time. That's what I was familiar with. I grew up with both my parents being European. So alcohol was super part of just like a normal dinner. I was allowed to drink at an earlier age at dinner, wine and stuff. And so I already knew that I liked how I felt. And then it just kind of opened up the door for the gateway of, the abuse to come in. And that's kind of the route that I took.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was actually the next question I was going to ask you, which is kind of, when did you start drinking, and what do you think influenced your drinking habits?
Yeah. I mean, I would say I started experimenting at, 14, 15, that eighth grade, ninth grade, when the peer pressure starts to come on. I tried alcohol before when I was younger, but it wasn't something that I was really interested in. I think also it was very normalized in my family. Like I didn't grow up with any alcoholism like in my immediate family. So I wasn't turned off. I just kind of saw it as like, oh, this is, enjoyable. My parents drink it. But, for me, I think I was going through so much emotional turmoil, especially at that time. So you have to think, okay, I've been dealing with all of this like OCD, panic attacks. For me, at the time, it was manifesting in different ways. I was going through like really bad stomach issues, and then I was having eating issues, and just I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was seeing therapists, but I was being an asshole, and I was like the kid that would go into therapy and like wouldn't talk for 45 minutes. So, once again, we're going back to all this untreated stuff. And then I'm hitting all the hormones. We're finally back in the States, which for me was such a culture shock. Like, as you know, living overseas, like I grew up my entire life overseas in these small international schools and very tight-knit communities, very diverse. And then I came back to a very like Southern, small, very predominantly white town. And there was racism, and there was, all this stuff that I had never experienced before, the bullying, the cliques and stuff. And I was like, whoa, like, but before this, I was in a class of like 7 students, and we're all friends, and of course there's always drama between, kids, but then I go from, going to a class of 7 kids and, wearing uniforms and not having to worry about what kind of cool clothes you're wearing and all this stuff, to living in America where there's all these cultural issues and norms. And I was so lost. And so really, like, I think tale as old as time, I got into a bad crowd, and not that they were bad people, but they were partying early, they were drinking early, they were doing all that kind of stuff. And I really wanted to fit in. And for me, addiction does run in my family. And, at the time I really didn't think of it because I thought, well, neither of my parents have an issue, but I have 2 uncles who have alcohol problems. One is sober. I have a grandparent that had an issue. Like it's a very long, there's many people, but for me, it was just the way that alcohol made me feel or didn't feel, I think would be, that relaxation. Because normally I was a very anxious person, always worried about what I looked like, how I was acting, was everything okay? Just very generalized anxiety. And then also on top of that, the OCD and the perfectionism. And I found that alcohol really made me feel like just relief from that. Like I got to escape that continuous discomfort that I had. And I took it to the max. I was like, okay, whenever I can drink, I'm going to do it. So I took that as an opportunity, to party extremely hard all throughout high school, Friday through Sunday. I was all at the different high schools. You needed to know where a party was, you would call me, but then the reputation came with, I started getting in trouble. I got suspended from high school for coming drunk. And then by my senior year, I was like skipping out early to go, day drink with friends. And, I look back at it now and I can see, wow, it was such a problem. But at the time, it was so normalized in the group of friends that I had that it really wasn't a problem. It was, almost like, oh, that's so cool. Oh, like everyone's over at Taylor's house day drinking, come after lunch is over. And, even though I don't talk to a lot of those people now, so I don't know how they're doing, but I know that I stuck with people who were doing the same things as I was doing because I wanted to kind of hide in plain sight. But I knew that there was an issue from the get-go. Because like I said, by the time I graduated, which thankfully I graduated, probably because my mom worked at the school and because I was a varsity athlete and sports were really, really important at our school. I had already had, like I said, 3 underage alcohol citations. I had gone to the alcohol classes. I had done like anger management courses. I was getting breathalyzed by my parents every night when I would get home. I just wasn't getting it. Like part of it was a game to me. And part of it was just, I didn't want to give up how it made me feel, because when I wasn't drinking and when I wasn't partying, I was that shy, anxious, perfectionist, like rigid, just this little, totally, lost, 16, 17-year-old girl. And when I was drinking, I got to be sexy. I got to be fun. I got to be loud. I got to be kind of this whole other persona that was so not who I actually was. And so, my drinking progressed. I was able to kind of keep it under control for a couple of years because I was living at home. My parents would not let me go to a 4-year university. They were like, we do not trust your ass. But of course, I'm sneaking out. I somehow managed, I got alcohol poisoning one night and managed to like get it past my dad. He didn't even realize, but I just have this really burned in terrible memory of lying over the toilet and singing the Lady Gaga song, like Just Dance, but like that it's going to be okay over and over. Cause I thought I was going to die. And the person who had brought me home had just left me. Like they didn't even bother staying with me either. So it was just, obviously not hang out with really good people. And by the time I left to go to a 4-year university, I mean, everything went off because, I'm wild. I'm totally free. No one's telling me. I'm not getting breathalyzed. And within the 3 years that I was at school, I completely burned everything to the ground. I got suspended from school. I was getting arrested. I was getting hospitalized. And on top of that, I had gotten diagnosed with panic disorder. So they had put me on benzodiazepines for my panic attacks. And then eventually I just started taking those daily. So I was taking benzos and drinking. And if anybody's familiar with benzos or you're not, think Xanax, Valium, Klonopin. You should not be mixing those two things at all. They're very extremely dangerous. And so I was blacking out probably like 90% of the time because it really didn't take much for me. And when I think about my college experience, honestly, it's a massive blur. When I look at my college transcript, I think of it this way. Like I was there for 3 years. I probably only actually was there on paper for like a year because it would be like a semester on, then I would take one off for mental health or, I had to, do an outpatient treatment and then go back. And then I got suspended for a year and then I went back and, just total absolute chaos. And I was at a really good school and I completely fucked it up. And finally, kind of what started my sober curious journey was my junior year. I was dating a guy, dated many guys left me. It was always, like you can stop drinking or, you have to calm down. I was like, fuck off, it's not happening. And I got arrested again, but I was on probation. So of course I'm not really taking it seriously. And they 5150'd me. And so I was at this little kind of like cottage. It wasn't a hospital, but this little cottage, and I was stuck there for 3 days. And they basically, went over everything. They kind of explained like, do you know that the meds that you're taking are not supposed to be drinking on? And kind of put things in perspective. But my lawyer called me because he was like, you really fucked up. You're on probation. You've broken your probation. You might go to jail. And so kind of, reality kicked in and I was like, holy fuck, I'm like 21 or 22 years old. And I'm like, I cannot go to jail. Like, I really didn't take this seriously at all. So I got out of the 5150 and I stopped drinking like immediately that day, because for me, it was never a physical addiction to the alcohol. It was more, the emotional and the socialization, but I was definitely very heavily addicted to the pills. And so, there was about a month or so when I was waiting for like my court and trying to figure out what was going on. And I was just so fucking anxious. My boyfriend at the time wasn't talking to me because I had punched him in the face, which is why I got arrested. Go figure. And, luckily, and, I like to talk about this because I think it's part of the problem with the recovery system is when I finally was presented to the court, and this was not my first assault either. So I'm a second offender, with a clear history of violence and aggression and all these things. And they're like, all right, well, we're giving you two options. You can go to jail for 3 months here in Blacksburg, Virginia, which is like bumfuck, or you can go to rehab. And I'm like, well, duh, I'm going to go to rehab. Like, piece of cake. I get to choose my own rehab. I was like, where did Britney Spears go? I'll go there. And so that's what I did. But before I move on with the story, I like to pinpoint that because it's like the only reason I got that option is because I'm a white woman. Like, there's no chance in hell that a man or a person of color would have been able to have the criminal record that I did and walk away pretty much scot-free. Like, I don't blame the system in the way that I made all my own choices. But when I look back at how much I basically got away with in those 3 years with community service, with, an anger management class or, picking up trash, it was a joke, really. And so I really didn't recognize how lucky that I was to be given the choice to go to treatment, because there's just so many other people and circumstances out there, had they been in the situation that I was in, would not have gotten that choice and they would have gone to jail. And I imagine, considering the drugs that I was on and my mental health state, going to jail would have made it ultimately 100 times worse and probably deadly, because benzos, besides alcohol, are the only drug that you can actually die from withdrawal. And so, detoxing from those meds in a non-detox facility in a jail would not have gone over well. And so that is one thing that I really like to highlight in just saying that I was very, very lucky to be on the medication that I was on and have the opportunity to go to an actual detox and take it seriously, because I dread, like, I have nightmares thinking about what would have happened had I said, well, fuck it, I'll do jail for 3 months. Like, I don't really have a problem, because fucking whoever, I had enough of an awareness that there was a problem that I was like, all right, I'll go to treatment. Because by that point, I was one of those people that was like, oh, I'll give up alcohol for a couple of weeks at a time. I'll give it up for Lent, but I always failed. Like, it was short-lived. Or I'll give up liquor. I'll do this. I'll take a break. And ultimately, it had always fallen through. So that really was the beginning. And that was in 2015. So that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. But then, so I went to treatment out here in LA and didn't really take it too seriously, of course. I had already, not been drinking for about a month. So I kind of walk in literally in a fucking tracksuit like an asshole. And I'm like, I haven't really drank in over a month. So, like, I'm fine. I'm just here. It was a 30-day inpatient in LA, like, no complaints, very nice place. Like, and I just remember getting there and they tell you to hand over all your meds, because I was on a bunch of meds, and they were like, yeah, you can't take those here. I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm prescribed. And kind of like, I think that explains a lot of my entire validation and how I got away. I think there's a lot of other drug addicts. Like, I know people don't like to call themselves that because it's like this stigma, right? Like, oh, I wasn't buying stuff off the streets, or, oh, I never used needles or whatever. Like, it's like, you're a fucking drug addict. So, like, I was a drug addict and I was addicted to these prescribed medications. Like, your doctor can be your pusher. Big pharma is the biggest fucking, drug dealer out there. Definitely most successful. And they took me off those and I detoxed off benzos. And that was literally I was hallucinating. I was completely like batshit crazy. Like, I don't even know how else to put it. Like, it was just torturous. And I think that really scared me, scared me fucking straight for a while. Definitely scared me off the drugs. But then, I left treatment and it kind of planted a seed. I would say, they introduced me to AA meetings. I met other people for the first time who had a lot of the same stories that I did, the same mentality. And it was really cool to meet people, I think, for the first time that understood how I was feeling and were using the same way that I was using, because, I had my party friends back at school and I definitely had friends who had problems, but nobody that was like openly saying, yeah, maybe this might be an issue. So this was the first time I had ever gotten to meet other people my age who are also like, yeah, I'm getting in trouble. And yeah, I want to stop. And, I want to do things differently. And for the first time, like, it made sobriety seem kind of cool. Like, I met these really cool people and we went to all these AA meetings in like West Hollywood, and we started seeing celebrities, and, everyone's dressed really great. And it was really a social scene. And for the first time, I was like, whoa, like, sobriety can actually be kind of dope. Like, that seems cool. There's, there's a whole other universe out there that it's still, there's still cliques, there's still all that. But rather than, oh, the cool kids drink, it's like, no, dude, the cool kids don't drink. Like, you do drugs, it's fucking whack. And I was like, what is this? What's happening? So, I left treatment and I was still living in California, and it took me about a year to really stop. Like, I went back to drinking, didn't go back to the drugs, but, for me, it was meeting another person, getting in a relationship with an addict, and really seeing another person go through what I was going through, and then worse, and getting a taste of my own medicine. Because before then, I'd always dated these really nice guys who I really just treated like shit. And walked all over and always picked alcohol over them. And for the first time, I was dating somebody who was a meth addict. And, I was getting the treatment that I got before, or that I was giving out, basically. He would disappear for days at a time, wouldn't be able to hear from him, show up. He would say he was quitting and he wouldn't, he was lying. I was finding needles. And I was just like, oh my God, this is horrible. I did this to people. And it started to really eat at me, because I think before I was just truly very selfish. Not that I wasn't suffering, not that I wasn't going through anything, but I was definitely also very selfish. And so going through and being in this relationship and trying to get this person sober and trying to get sober together. And I had decided, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. And it was just really, it wasn't a night that was really worse than any others, because I had a lot of bad nights. But the way that I can kind of describe it is I think Mark Lewis describes it best in his book, The Biology of Desire, when he's talking to this woman who was a heroin addict, I believe. But she just talks about a threshold of disgust, where like finally she was so disgusted with using that she couldn't do it anymore. And that was, for me, like the best way to describe it, is just the thought of even picking up a drink disgusted me so much that I was like, oh, I can't do it. And the way he describes it in his book is basically like every person has their own inner threshold. And that's why, people are different, and everyone's rock bottom or, threshold is going to be different. But for me, the negative to positive experiences had been, different for a long time. So definitely more negative, but so much so finally that they completely outweighed all the positive experiences. And they kind of talk about it in the big book in AA of like the moth to a flame, where you're like, okay, fuck this shit. Like, I'm out. Like, I just can't even, I can't even fathom. And that's kind of, I had another really bad night. I ended up breaking into the hospice where my grandparents were staying because they were dying. And that's why everybody was back in town, meeting each other to say goodbye. And of course, my selfish ass wants to make it about me. So I have this, big, just day drinking and being an asshole. And I just was driving back from Bakersfield, California, which is like 2 hours away from LA. And I'm like stuck in traffic, coming down, like so hungover. I think I'd done drugs that night too. So I'm like coming down hard. And like, I just remember I'm like stuck in traffic in the mountains because there was some fires. And so everything was backed up. And I'm like throwing up in a McDonald's cup because I can't get out, like having anxiety attacks and like just trying to get fucking back to LA. And then this moment I was just like, okay, can't do this anymore. Like, we've been here so many times. Like, I'm talking to myself. I'm like, Kayla, we have been here time and time again. How many times have we said enough is enough? I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I'm stopped. And yet here we are. And this time, I think really what pushed me over was I had alienated so many people, but I never really alienated my family. And that night I really fucked up. Like, I did it in front of everybody. My entire family saw how bad I actually was. I think I punched somebody in the face, like one of the hospice workers, like just completely out of control, and my mom had to call the cops on me, somehow talked my way out of that. And then I ended up breaking into the hospice to sleep there. And I was just like, you have nobody. Like, you officially have nobody. You can't even, like, your meth addicted boyfriend doesn't even want to talk to you. Okay. Like, that's how fucking bad you are right now, dude. What are you going to do? Like, you can drive back to LA and you're going to go home to nothing. You're going to have nobody to talk to. Nobody's going to fucking care what's going on with you. You basically have two options. You can either probably go kill yourself or stop doing this and fucking do something with your life. Because I think what I realized was I had so much potential. Like, I was at a really good university. I knew I was smart. I know that I'm smart, right? And I was so bitter about fucking it up that I was like, oh, I could never go back. I could never, I'm too far gone. This like mentality of like, oh, it's too much damage is done. And I kind of, in that moment, something told me like, that's bullshit. Like, that's complete bullshit. You are not done. You're not done until you fucking quit. Like, you will always have a chance to redeem yourself, no matter how fucking low you get. But if you quit, like that's when, like, that's really, so for me, I was like, okay, fuck this. I'm not a quitter. Like, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a fucking quitter. And as long as there's a chance that I can fix this and do better, I have to. So I finally got back into LA, and the next day I went to an AA meeting, and I didn't pick up a drink after that because I was just fucking done. And so that was like almost 5 years ago. Yeah. I don't really, and we can talk about this later, but for me, I don't really count time anymore. That for me, it's not productive. But yeah, that was about 5 years ago. And ever since then, really alcohol and drugs have not been a part of my life at all. I would probably say that I live an alcohol-free life, and, I used to identify as sober. I'm not really into the labeling anymore. But just, completely have changed my life and my lifestyle. And never looked back, definitely never had an interest in going back to that.
Wow, that is like such an inspirational story of like how you really just like turned your life around and you went through a lot. It's pretty amazing to see like where you are now with 1,000 Hours Dry. It's huge.
For sure. I mean, I think, not to say I don't have my bad days, not to say I'm a perfect person. Obviously, like, if you lived with me, or if anybody wants to talk to my boyfriend about how annoying I am, or, I'm still, I have a lot of things I'm working on all the time. Like, I see a therapist, I take medication, but it took a lot, it really like, some things that I really took away from, like, because at the time when I got sober, like, really the only options were 12-step meetings. This was before the online sober community was a thing. This was before, I think there might've been some of the online coaching stuff happening, but wasn't really interested in any of that. And the 12 steps, that's what I was familiar with from treatment. So I did that for about a year and a half. And I took a lot of great things away from that. And some of the things I took away were just, you can go as low as you want to. And I really loved when people would say, like, your rock bottom is where you stop digging. Like, there's no one rock bottom for anybody else. And it's like, it can always get worse, but you can always stop if you really want to. And so for me, that whole idea of, okay, I can have a redemption story. Like, I am not a lost cause. I am not, a bad person. I'm somebody who's done bad things. I'm somebody who's acted really selfishly, but now is my time to show people in my life that I love, that I care about, that that's not who I am. That's not who my parents raised. And that I'm not going to waste the potential that I know that I have continuing to, self-harm, which that's what drinking is really, at least the way I was doing it, and actually do something with my life. Because when I look back to, my like 15-year-old self, and even before then, like I got great grades. I ended up going to a great university. I had a very promising future, but it just wasn't a priority. And so, tell myself and kind of look in the mirror and give that pep talk of like, dude, you are privileged as fuck. Stop being this way. You're not in the middle of a third world country. You're not in the fucking middle of nowhere in the United States with no future. You're not so all these things that could have been, holding people back or validating their like, oh, well, this is just my life. I'm like, dude, no, like you have parents that love and support you financially, like emotionally, like you have friends now who want you to be sober, who like you for you, not the party you, not the drunk you, the actual you. You need to use this. You have to, like, you are obligated because people gave you a chance. Like, you got to go to treatment. A lot of people don't get to go to treatment. You got a chance to get sober. Like, this is a privilege. This is not like a punishment. And now, like, how I always saw it and what really got instilled in me, and even after I left AA, like what I thought was really important and what I wanted to carry into the world, however I was going to do that, is that I needed to be of service. And I get kind of emotional, but it was like, I never would have gotten sober if it wasn't for, obviously, like my parents, people around me who did love me, who said, like, we know that you're not a bad person. We know that you're just struggling. Let us help you, like, let us help you. And finally allowing people to help me, because I was so hell-bent on doing it myself, which we can't. We have to stay sober for ourselves. Like, we're the only ones who can choose to pick up, but we need support. Like, nobody can do this alone. And so really just allowing the community to take me in and having a sponsor and really diving, like, for me, what I needed was to dive super heavily into the community. I took a lot of AA commitments. I went to meetings like every day. I would go to, like, sober parties, and really in the beginning, that's what my life revolved around, and that's what I needed. But by the time I was ready to leave, right, like I just knew that the 12 steps weren't really working for me anymore. I needed an evolution, but I knew that I needed to continue the work that they were doing there in the way of being of service. Because if it wasn't for all these people who never had to help me, who weren't getting paid to do any of this, AA is a non-revenue based organization, like, I would not be here, and a lot of my other friends would not be here. So I was like, I have to, no matter what I do, continue to be of service. Like, it's not about me. I don't want to call it altruism, but like, I have to continue to give back to this community, because that's how this works. Like, that's how we're gonna thrive. That's how we're gonna help more people. That's how we're gonna help normalize this, is by giving back without reciprocation. You cannot expect anything. And so that's kind of where the idea of the dry club and 1,000 hours dry came from is just not altruistically. I needed a way to give back that wasn't the 12-step programs. And that's kind of how 1,000 hours dry was born, because I knew that, once again, going back to, some old AA sayings, but, they say, you have to give it away in order to keep it. And I really, really believe that, because I've known a lot of people who have gone out and not come back, or people who are still out, who I knew for a really long time to be sober, and they stopped doing the work, and they stopped working on themselves, and they stopped giving back to the community, and they made it all about them. And I think, your ego is what got us here, right? And then your ego is what's going to take you out. And so that's something that I have to remind myself of daily, because the ego is involved in everything, right? Like not just sobriety, not just recovery, but it's in social media, it's in influencing, it's in thought leadership and everything. So whenever I find myself now, like I call it in like a pre-lapse mode, it's when I'm letting my ego take over. And I'm like, oh, I'm posting on social media a lot. I'm making it about me. I'm, like 1,000 hours dry. I'm going to post stuff about me and my journey. And, whenever it starts to be about me, I know that I'm at risk. And so I really, really try very hard to live in a world where I think about myself, as in self-care, but I wake up every day and I think, all right, like, well, how can I serve the community first? And then in return, by serving others, that's what makes me feel good. And I do get something out of that. And that's how I, continue to thrive and give myself happiness and, doing something I love and that I'm passionate about.
So let's talk about 1,000 hours dry. You kind of brought it up. How did that, how did you end up creating that? How did that come about?
For sure. So it's not really this, crazy cool story. I was living in LA. I was looking for a way to connect with other sober and like non-drinking individuals outside of the program, because I had left the 12 steps. And some of the negative things about those programs too is once you leave, you're kind of shunned a little bit. So, a lot of my friends weren't talking to me anymore. Once you kind of stop participating, you're kind of seen as like being dry is literally what they call it. And that's why I took the name, but it's more of a derogatory negative thing to be called dry. It means like you're not drinking, but you're not doing the work. Probably going to relapse is like the connotation. And I was like, well, I'm not that, because I'm doing my therapy, I'm exercising, I'm back in school, like my life's going really good. But I'm just, I needed something else. I didn't want to continue to go to meetings all the time. I didn't really want to be plugged into this. I also, never really got behind some of the things that are their kind of foundations. I'm agnostic and it's a religious-based program. No matter who wants to say it's not, it definitely is. And don't believe in powerlessness, and I don't believe in the disease model. So, there were always bits and pieces missing for me. And I needed to step away from the program so I could explore, how is my sobriety going to be able to continue to evolve? How am I going to continue to grow and transform as an individual? And the first step I kind of needed to do was, well, I need a support system, but how do I find other sober people that aren't in the 12 steps? Because, we're not that obvious. We're out there. There's a ton of us, but, this was like right at the beginning of like sober influencers. So like I, at the time, had like a regular influencer page, not my personal page now. It's like a deactivated account. Because I was doing like all the cliche, LA modeling kind of stuff. And I used that account to start talking about being sober. So it was like a fitness and health, account, but then I started to add in sobriety. And then through some like hashtags and stuff, I found some of the OG, sober influencers. Like I found Emily from Highlight Reel. I found Kristen from Boozless, Rachel from Shots to Shakes. And we all just started kind of connecting and talking. And slowly but surely, the community started to become bigger. People were starting to make Instagrams about just being sober. Before that, it was like, these were all of just our regular accounts. And then we talked about sobriety on there. But then one day I was talking actually, and I was like, well, I want to do something like fun to incorporate my followers in my sobriety, because there's so many fucking fitness and health and wellness influencers, but there's not really anything for sobriety. Like, how can I kind of bring people into this without turning them off? Because when I'm talking about like hardcore recovery, you're not including a lot of other people, and that's that whole gray area drinking. And so I had actually just hit my 1,000 days sober, and I was like, okay, so like, I also I had studied social media and communications in school. So I was like, all right, I know how to do this. Let's get something trending. So I was like, all right, I want to do a challenge. Like, anybody can do a challenge. It's super inclusive. It's not a long-term commitment. And that's kind of how, in a caffeinated, induced, like manic, thing, I was like 1,000 hours dry, it's 42 days, 42 days. It's a little bit more than the 30 days that people normally do for dry January. But it's not tied to anything. It doesn't have to be a certain month. Anybody can do it at any time. And doing the research, it was like, this is enough time for people to really start to see some of the benefits of living an alcohol-free lifestyle. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do this challenge. And I originally thought it was going to be like 20 people. And I even was like, oh, if you're in the LA area, like, let's do a little pop-up event. Like I set up an event space and did all these goodie bags because I had like a lot of brand affiliations at the time. And then I got like Chris from Boozless involved, and Rachel and Emily, who were actually some of the OG hosts from 2 years ago. And, what I thought was going to be like 20 people, within a couple of days was a couple hundred people. And then it was, a couple thousand people. And I was like, oh, fuck. Okay. What are we going to do? Like, this is okay. Cannot make that many goodie bags, and so I ended up, creating the page for it. And, some other people reached out and were like, hey, how can I get involved? Brenna from Sobriety, she's been with me since day one. And it just really kind of created itself in a way, like, people wanted to know how to do it. And we just said, it's really simple. Like, don't drink for these 42 days, and we're going to support you through it. We're going to educate you. We're going to inspire you. We're going to share your journey with others, so that you're not doing this alone. And, over the past 2 years, it's grown, from a couple hundred people to over, 20,000 people interested in either the alcohol-free lifestyle or, the sober curious tourism kind of thing. And so it really just started as a way to kind of connect, non-drinkers or people who were sober curious, and now has, become really its own ecosystem. And that's really what I wanted it to be. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Social media has so many negative connotations, but, for me, 1,000 Hours Dry is a perfect example of how social media can be used for good and can be used for education and community and support. And, it's a totally volunteer-based community. We have multiple different chapters. And, I would love, my kind of vision for the future of 1,000 Hours Dry is to kind of make it, alongside Smart Recovery and AA. Like, I would love to have people have chapters in their communities. And if they feel like, hey, I want to start, a local dry club in my town, for sure, let's do it. I will give you the tools on how to start and go from there. Because I think really anybody who's interested in the lifestyle and has the same aligned views as we do, and not even like, that's one thing that I kind of like to say, we're like the Buddhist version of the recovery programs, in the way that, like, I don't care if you do AA and the dry club. I don't care if you're in Smart Recovery or Refuge Recovery and do the dry club. You know, we're welcoming all types of people from all types of lanes, and specifically wanted to not be affiliated with anything else for that purpose. So that way people who had substance abuse problems like me could come here and feel welcome, and people who just felt like, you know what, my drinking's pretty kind of maladaptive, I don't want to drink anymore, could also come and feel like they were part of it. And even if you didn't have the same story or the same background, there was not that competitive air like some of the other programs have, where, oh, you know, you have to qualify, or you have to have a certain amount of time, or there's a hierarchy. And I was like, fuck that shit. Okay. Like, we're all just trying to live better. We're all just trying to, you know, escape and find people who get us. So let's make a safe space that's inclusive to everybody, and let's educate people. Like, I do think that that's true from AA. It's about practice, not promotion. Like, do the thing and share your experiences, and you will inspire others. We're not shoving it down people's throats. We're not telling anybody you have to do this, you have to do that. Everything is a suggestion. And that's why we put out, you know, I think education is our top thing, because I always just say, you know, you can't unlearn things. Like, once you know alcohol is a carcinogenic, once you know now, oh, a bottle of wine is the same risk for cancer as 10 cigarettes, like, you're not going to forget that. And I think those are the key seeds that we're planting in people, that whether you're ready to get sober now or not, following the page is a really amazing step, because you're going to see awesome people. You're going to see their transformation right before your eyes. You're definitely going to see other people's stories who you relate to, you know, and if you're following like our hashtags and stuff, that's a great way to connect with other people. You know, like, you never know who could be living in your apartment complex that's sober, you know, or in your town, or, you know, on your freaking, you know, softball team. Like, I always joke, because I do actually have an AA tattoo. So I was like, you know, unless there's like a sign in your head that says, hey, I'm sober, you know, there's no gang sign. So like, we are everywhere. And that was kind of what the idea of the dry club is, just like, I want it to become a lifestyle. Like, you know, it's not about, oh, I'm in recovery, oh, I had to have a substance abuse issue. And that's why even now I've kind of dropped the labels, because it's like, I just don't drink. I'm very open about how over the past 5 years I have had a drink. Was it a slip? Was it a relapse? No, it was a conscious decision, and it didn't serve me. And I just kept living the alcohol-free lifestyle. And I kind of just see it more as, you know, I don't have any vegan friends that talk about how much vegan time they have. They're just vegan. You know, like, that's how they live their lifestyle. They're not worried about how many days vegan they have. They just know, today I'm being vegan. I'm not eating, you know, animal product. That's how I kind of feel about alcohol. Sometimes I say I'm sober. Sometimes I say I'm alcohol free, whatever. You know, I know that I started my journey in 2015, 2016. I've been living this lifestyle since then. And I know today I'm not going to drink. And so I'm alcohol free. And that's pretty much, you know, how I see it. And if anybody else, you know, of course we've gotten trolls, there's haters, there's people who say, you know, you're not following the rules, you can't do that. And I'm just like, first of all, there's no recovery police, and nobody gets a trophy for being the most sober person. You know, if somebody is celebrating a milestone and they had a few slips, I'm going to congratulate them and applaud them the same way that I'm going to applaud somebody who got the same amount of time with no slips, because today we're both sober and we're both all still aiming for the same thing. So the only time you're failing is when you're quitting and saying, well, fuck this, I'm not going to try anymore. You know, I'm going to go back to all my old behaviors. I'm going to start using again. And I'm going to, you know, go back into, you know, drinking regularly or using regularly. Then yeah, obviously there's a problem, and we want to help you. But once again, we're not shunning you. We're not saying you can't come back. Like, you're not losing anything. I always see relapses or, you know, sober curious. I think people who are sober curious don't just have to be people who are new to sobriety. You could be somebody who's been sober for a long time and you decide, hey, you know, I might want to kind of try moderation a little bit again. And to me, that you kind of go back into being sober curious for a little while. And to me, those people aren't any less of a person or any less part of this community than people who are strict abstinence. Because sure, is that the goal, to be completely abstinent? That's awesome. But that's not everybody's journey, you know? And that was like a big thing happening right now with, you know, Demi Lovato coming out and being open about like, well, actually I'm drinking moderately. And everyone's like, oh my God, it's such a terrible idea. You know, she's going to fail. She's going to die. It's like, first of all, why is her life anybody else's fucking business? And second of all, you know, a lot of people, like, it sounds kind of fucked up, but a lot of people need to relapse to realize that this is the lifestyle that they need. You know, we have to make mistakes in order to learn. I don't think I know anybody who decided to get sober and then that was it. They were like, oh, I have a problem. Oh, I'm done. Like and I've met hundreds and hundreds of sober people. Everyone had a sober curious phase. Everybody had phases where they were like, okay, I'm going to stop. And they couldn't. And they tried and they got time and then they drank or they used, and then they got more time and they drank or they used. Like it's this linear progression, you know, idea that like, oh, sobriety is you're starting here. And it's not, it's like a fucking wave, you know, like totally. And so I'm just, I think it's really important for me and for, you know, my host at 1,000 Hours Dry, like to just push the transparency. If you have a slip, be open about it. You know, some friends, there's even a couple of hosts who are not completely sober, who are mindful drinkers. I'm like, dude, as long as you are like sober tourism, like you're still thinking like, you know, maybe I do want to get sober one day. I'm just not ready yet. You're fucking part of what we're doing. Like, I hate the idea that anybody, you know, is being turned away for anything, because for every person that, you know, other programs turned away because they didn't qualify, you don't know what happened to those people. They could have gone out and died. They could have gone out and gotten worse. Like, why would you ever want to turn somebody away? Because, oh, well, you're not a real alcoholic, so you don't belong here. Okay, like, so we want them to go out and get worse before they come back? That's fucking dumb. Like, so yeah, that's there it is now. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I really admire that model of inclusivity, because I know I myself have experienced that. Like when I met someone in the AA world who said to me that based on what I had said about myself, she thought that I didn't have a problem. And that was when I was around 100 days alcohol free. And that upset me, because I was like, I've worked really hard to get to where I am right now. And just because I don't have the same journey as you did does not mean that like you get to define my story or my journey or kind of what's going on with me. And so I really think that there is like a real need for this kind of inclusive space that you're creating.
Yeah. I mean, it's simple, right? Like whatever works for you works for you. Like do what works for you. And that's why I'm totally fine with, like, you know, a lot of it does unfortunately come from the 12-step programs. That's where a lot of the negativity comes from. But people got to put it in context, right? Like this was a program created like 100 years ago by men for men. It wasn't created for women. It wasn't created for people of color. And it was created 100 years ago. So I don't know about you guys, but like, I'm not really trying to do things that were created 100 years ago if there are better ways and more modern ways to do them, you know? And so, you know, once again, there are always going to be great things from different programs, but I kind of think of it as like a salad bar, or like what was somebody saying? I was like, made like a Starbucks reference. I was like, you know, beforehand there was only like half and half or milk. And that doesn't work for everybody. I'm lactose intolerant. And now we have all these plant-based milks. And that's kind of like the program. Like sometimes they're not going to have coconut milk. So you're going to go to oat milk, and you got to make sure that you like and have different things available, because not everything is going to be available at the time you need it. And I think COVID was a perfect example of how, you know, when you are only, you know, when your sobriety hangs on going to meetings and that's it, and now all of a sudden you can't go to meetings, that's not healthy. Like you should have multiple watering holes for your sobriety. So that way, if something is not accessible at the time, you have other ways to cope. And that's why there's a sobriety toolkit. You know, that's why See all these influencers talking about their sobriety toolkit. Like, yes, it's annoying. Everybody's fucking talking about it, but it's important. And that's why we harp on it. Like, go to therapy. If you need to be on medication, take your medication. Anybody telling you that you're not sober because you're taking medication is not a fucking doctor, and they're quack. Like, just sorry. That's totally old school thinking, and I get it. But also, a lot of people don't understand that a lot of like antipsychotic medication is not the same thing as taking like controlled substances. Like, I love to give the example of like, I take an SSNRI, which helps me with my serotonin uptake. And it's like, okay, so it took me like 4 weeks for it to start actually working. So I had to take it every day. And it's like, so I'm not sober, but like, so do you want to take some of my Effexor? Because you can't take too many of them. Well, maybe you'll probably throw up or something, but like, you can't get high. So like, good luck if you want to have like a change of, if you want to have, what do they say? Like, anything that affects you from the neck up is a no-no. It's like, well, come back to me in 4 to 6 weeks and that's when it'll work for you. So it's not really, you're not using it to alter your state of mind. If anything, the coffee, the energy drinks, the smoking, all that shit is what's altering us above the neck. So it's just there's a lot of hypocrisy. There's a lot of, bullshit in the recovery community that I personally just have no problem kind of calling out. If people need to take their meds, they need to take their meds. I'm all for harm reduction. If you were somebody that used to be hardcore, an addict, and you were using needles and now you're just drinking, dude, good for you. That's better than what you were doing before. If you are still using needles, if you can get a hold of clean needles, dude, do it. Good for you. Go to a needle exchange, go use clean needles. Like, just, you can't, everybody's not going to be able to be abstinent. It's just not possible. And especially people who are homeless, people who are in bad situations, people who have physical dependencies and who can't, go to detox and don't have the same healthcare and stuff. Like, this just idea of like, well, I did it this way, so you have to do it this way. And if you don't, you didn't do it right. It's like, this whole thing is supposed to be about the removal of the ego. And yet this to me sounds like all ego. So why are you worried about what I'm doing? It doesn't affect your sobriety. And unless it affects your sobriety, fuck off. Like, so it's just, I think it's, I always ask people, like, if it's bothering you, you got to ask yourself why it's bothering you. If somebody else's time, if somebody else decides not to change their date, like I remember when I was very open about how I drank and I chose not to change my sobriety date because for me, it was kind of an experiment. And I could have easily said it. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to go back to, mindful or moderate drinking, and done that because I had healed myself. I really believe I am no longer a substance abuse user. I'm not an alcoholic anymore. I'm not an addict. But I was like, this doesn't serve me anymore. I'm really not interested in it anymore. And because I'm not using it in the same way that I did before, having a couple drinks, it's really not that great anymore. Like, I didn't feel great the next day, sure. Yeah, it's fun for like a couple, like, what do they say? Like, the buzz lasts for like 20 minutes. And then after that, it's kind of, it's super dulled. And so, I remember so many people got mad and they were like, you cannot keep your sobriety date. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I did not know you were the recovery police. Like, why does it matter to you what I'm doing and whatever keeps me sober and keeps me going? Because I've known so many people who have not only just gone out, but who have died because they relapsed and they got everything taken away from them. Their sponsees got taken away. Their commitments got taken away. If they were like a manager at a sober living or something, their job got taken away, which would never happen in any other job, right? Like, unless you like do it at work. And it's just like, you can't destroy people for making mistakes and they can't learn. Like, obviously their recovery wasn't working right, or they wouldn't be drinking. So, or they wouldn't, be relapsing. And I kind of see just every relapse and every slip as an opportunity for you to ask yourself, okay, well, how did I get here? What am I doing that I feel like I still need to go back to this, or this still needs to be part of my life? And then what I hope for everybody is to get to a place like I've gotten where I don't really count my days. I don't really count anything. I just know that alcohol isn't involved in my life. And when things get really hard, when I had like, let's say probably a couple days ago, I had like a really awful depressive, like, I guess it was kind of I was in like a manic state. And I got so angry because I still deal with a lot of anger management. But, I just had this huge tantrum and I was so angry and, everything was going wrong in that moment. I was so stressed out dealing with new contracts for a new job and a bunch of legal stuff. And I felt like completely overwhelmed. We're getting a new puppy in like a week. I was like, is everything ready? And that for me is like, it was one of those moments that I easily could have been like, well, fuck this. I'm just going to get high or I'm going to get drunk. And then I'm not going to have to deal with how uncomfortable and unstable I feel. And that did not even fucking cross my mind for 5 seconds. 5 years ago, for sure, that would have been the first thing I would have done. What do I do now? I go take a nap. I say, fuck off to my boyfriend, leave me alone. I go take a nap. I scream into my pillow. I go to the gym. I take a hot shower. Like, I do all these other things and I don't even think about drinking. And that's crazy to me because 5 years ago, that I could have never imagined that was even a mindset that I could be in, where drinking was not only like, it's not that I didn't even do it, it's that I didn't even think about doing it. And to where just alcohol is a non-factor in my life. It's like soda. I haven't had a soda in like 10 years. It's just not part of my life. Like, it's like a colorblind person not being able to see color. It's just not there. I have no desire for it. I don't miss it. It's just not part of my life. And that's kind of what I want to give to other people, is that experience and that strength and that foundation to be able to build this completely super fulfilling lifestyle with all the tools they need, because life's not going to get any easier as we get older. We get more stressed out, like now I'm 28. Now we're getting a puppy, we're talking about buying houses. We'll probably have a kid in the next 5 years, Oh, holy shit. That's a lot. But I've created my own sobriety toolkit here. You're going to hear it again. And this support system and this ecosystem to where I just, like I've said it before and I'll say it again, like I would rather take gum off of the sidewalk and eat it than pick up a drink or pick up or use. Like it's so unattractive to me now. And so if I can think that way, and, I was the kind of person that would, I was a bartender, so I could drink at work, and I would, drink the floaters when I was like wasted at 2 a.m. at a party, and I would wake up and drink whatever I could find, like was getting hospitalized for getting so drunk. And I was the girl bashing her head on the inside of the cop car. I went from that to now, owning my own organization, now being part of this really amazing, another organization, Reframe, the app, and getting to change the way people, drink and use on an international level, living in an amazing place with a guy who's known me for a long time. He knew me in college. He knew me when I was drinking, and gave me another chance when I got sober, and now we've been together for a while, and none of that would have happened if I didn't give myself a chance and say, you know what, I might not love myself right now, but one day I will. And how can I act in order to make that person in the future proud? So I say that now too, when I'm having like a really bad day or a bad week or a bad month, like this month has been shit. I'm just like, okay, I don't want to go to the gym, but Kayla in 6 weeks is going to be happy that I went to the gym. Or, I really don't want to get out of bed, but, Kayla in a week has deadlines for this new job, and Kayla in a week is going to be happy that you woke up. So I do it for me in the future. And I found that trick has been super helpful. So just food for thought.
Yeah. Like the future me, I do future self meditations often.
Totally. Yeah.
Visualizing the future me. All right. I have one last thing before we wrap up. I like to do a either or round of things with my podcast guests. Are you game?
Yes.
Okay. Either or chocolate or vanilla ice cream.
Chocolate.
Okay. Summer or winter?
Winter.
Okay. Hot coffee first I should say coffee or tea.
Well, coffee, but I do decaf.
Okay. Hot coffee or cold coffee?
Iced for sure.
Okay. Mornings or night times?
Night.
Ocean or swimming pool?
Ocean.
Ocean.
Yes.
I'm running out of ideas.
Well, here we can end on that because it's actually ocean is important to me because I'm not like a big ocean person. Like I don't really like to go in the ocean. It's kind of scary. But it's important to me because I remember when I was in rehab and we went on a trip because I went to rehab in LA and, I was having a really hard time because I was like, look, I don't believe in God. Like, and so giving my power to God is not working for me because I don't believe in him. How am I going to make this work? I really want to get sober. I really want to do this. I really want this to work, but I don't believe in this and I can't pretend. I've already been trying and it's not working. And I just remember I was sitting on the beach because they took us to Malibu and it was like me and my other friend. And it was the day before we both got discharged. And we were just sitting on the beach and one of my texts was sitting next to me and I was just kind of telling her and she was like, you know what? Like, why don't you just make your higher power the ocean? And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, your higher power can be anything, but it just has to be something that's bigger than you that you can't control. And she's like, nobody can control the ocean. And I was like, okay, I can do that. Like the ocean, it's super powerful. It's so vast. It's been here way longer than, all of us. And it's beautiful. And there's just something about it that's super calming. And so I just remember I was like, yeah, the ocean, like that will be my higher power. And then literally we got in trouble because my friend and I who were getting discharged just ended up running into the ocean with our clothes full on and just like laughing and stuff. But it was like, I knew it was going to be okay in that moment. And like, even now I'm lucky because I live near the beach, obviously. But, whenever I'm feeling like really lost or really unstable or, unsure, or when I need to be humbled too. And I think that's, either way, I'll go back. And luckily I'm like a 2-minute drive and I'll just kind of go and sit there and look at it and just be like, all right, bitch, you're tiny. Don't get ahead of yourself, your ego. Or I'll just say like, holy shit, like, look at this, like this, that, I mean, you can't even, it's indescribable to just watch the waves and just be like, the fucking universe is so rad. Like this planet is so cool. Like, wow. Like, and just be in awe for a second and just realize like whatever problems I'm dealing with are like so small. And like, I just kind of think no matter what happens, the ocean is every day and it's always going to be there in and out. It's always going to be doing its thing, no matter what else is going on. And I have to kind of just be like that. Like I will push through no matter what. I got this.
What an amazing note to end on.
For sure.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you so much, Kayla. This was an amazing interview. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I look forward to continuing to follow your journey and see where it takes you.
Definitely. All right. We'll talk soon.
Yes. Thank you so much. Have a great Bye.